When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems.
But this is just one more example of something that is not thought through.
Let's take a closer look now at the rift developing between President Trump and Mexico's Enrique Peña Nieto.
But what he will never, ever change is Mexico paying for the wall.
Big issues around the world. People expect the President of the United States and the elected officials in this country to treat these problems seriously.
I enjoyed Trump's views on how we should keep this country safe and keep out anybody who's trying to threaten our jobs.
I think it might cause a lot of problems.
I think of the border as being, I guess, mostly a cultural battle now.
The high security that we saw at the border at Friendship Park made us wonder what the border is like in other areas, and we realized that people are probably deterred from crossing at the San Ysidro-Tijuana border because there's such high security there. So when we went to Kakuma, California, we noticed that this would be a really popular place for migrants to cross because in the mountains they have less security and it's more available for people to cross there. But we also realized that this is a desert and the harsh landscape and the climate can get up to 120 degrees in the summer, and people are dying of heat stroke and of hypothermia, and these harsh conditions make it impossible for people to survive. And we saw how groups like Border Angels, for example, and other humanitarian groups would leave water bottles in the desert for people who are crossing, and we tried to leave some water bottles as well so that these individuals would hopefully be able to survive the journey.
We're here in Kakuma, California, which is a small, mountainous, and isolated town on the border between San Diego and Mexico. And there's a sign here. It's a wooden structure with rags and tires and ropes all around it. And it says, "Are you nice? Yes or no?" And they also had left behind one of these zapatillas, which are little shoes that are used to wipe their footprints to avoid being caught by the Border Patrol.
Kakuma, California is such a remote location, but because the border security there is less heightened than it is in San Ysidro or a major city like that, it's a really popular location for migrants to cross. We're here in Kakuma, California, and we're right up against the fence on the US side, and it's really interesting because I think the fence appears pretty flawed in a lot of places. It's not very high and there are a lot of gaps in the fence, but this area is patrolled mainly through drones and aerial surveillance, as well as Border Patrol agents on the ground in trucks. So I think to a lot of people it might appear like the border security is really lax in this area, when in actuality we have a lot of infrastructure that supports border control in other ways.
Since we live so close to the border, we thought it would be kind of imperative to visit the one that's closest to us. So earlier we went down to Friendship Park, which is right along the San Diego-Tijuana border. And to get there, we sort of had to hike through some harder conditions for us, but I think it was really important for us to go through to sort of understand just a small part of what immigrants have to experience when they're crossing the border.
So we also visited Chicano Park, which was a park created in the 1970s, right under the structures of the Coronado Bridge. And in this park, profound muralists and painters found ways to portray the Latin American spirit through beautiful murals along the structures and pillars of the surrounding area.
Chicano Park is a really important location, especially since Obama just recently designated it as a national landmark. And it was really interesting for us to see this prominent landmark depicting the stories of migrants and of undocumented workers. I think a lot of times people aren't really willing to acknowledge that undocumented workers contribute a lot of culture to our society, but living so close to the border, we see a lot of the influence, cultural influence that undocumented migrants bring to our city, and that's really exemplified in a lot of the murals at Chicano Park, particularly in the mural of the undocumented worker by Michael Schnorr. It kind of has 4 pieces that depict different elements of the migrant experience, and being able to see that in person was a really meaningful way to see what that journey's like.
I think one thing that people really fail to realize is that the city of San Diego and the city of Tijuana, they are so interconnected that it's really hardly 2 different cities at all. The economies are so intertwined and dependent on one another, and I think that a lot of that is really reliant on migration.
Warning, international border. It is unlawful for any person to cross the international border at any place other than a port of entry. The nearest ports of entry are Tecate and Calexico, California.
When people talk about migrants crossing the border illegally, a lot of questions are asked about why don't they just cross legally, but the thing is that it's so difficult to cross legally and obtain a visa that there's no way that the people who are willing to risk their lives to cross illegally could afford to cross legally, because you have to prove that you're employed in Mexico, you have to prove that you have a home, and most people can barely support themselves, let alone buy a visa so they can cross legally. It's not a choice. People don't break the law because they can.